Hi, welcome back to my shop. Well, in this case, my office, but that's really where all of the design work usually starts for the pieces that I do build down in the shop. This episode, or this series of episodes, is going to be a first for my video blog in that this is sort of the viewer's choice. I put a vote out there a few months back to decide what the next project was going to be, and a tool chest ended up winning by a landslide. Now, there are a lot of other tool chest designs and plans and books and videos out there, and I really didn't want to just repeat what somebody else had already done. So I thought it would be interesting to do a little bit of a different design for this one. And I also wanted to do something that I would be proud to put in my gallery too. I don't want it to just be, you know, a purely utilitarian chest of drawers for my shop. So what I decided to do is go with a chest motif and basically just shrink the dimensions down to about 2 feet by 2 feet and a foot deep. And playing around with some designs, I thought it would be interesting and a little bit unique to do what I'm calling a stepped front chest, where each of the drawers is set back a little bit from the drawer in front of it. So almost a stair motif, if you will. And it turns out that creates a few challenges both with design and construction. So I thought I would walk you through my design process, and in fact it took me 2 or 3 iterations to get the design right. And it was also important for me to get proportions down and make this thing very visually appealing, again, because I do want to be able to put it in my gallery. So this first episode I'm going to start off with walking you through my design process and show you where some of those challenges really came into play. My first step is going into SketchUp and laying out the overall dimensions of my case. I know that I want to have a 24-inch by 24-inch outside dimension. So you can see I've got the dimensions laid out here, and I have kind of the basic frame constructed. What's also critical here is the stock width. Now, I decided to go with 5/8 inch stock instead of 3/4 inch stock. I did an iteration of this design already where I did use 3/4 inch stock, and for a piece this size it just looked too hefty or bulky, so I went back and I redesigned it with 5/8 inch stock, and I think it really makes a difference. The trick to this next part is I have to figure out how to lay out my drawers, and this gets especially complicated because this particular case is going to have a stepped front, which means each of my drawer blades has to be doubled up. So this might actually be easier to explain if I jump ahead a couple of scenes and show you exactly what I mean by this, and I'll kind of backtrack. I want to graduate the drawers so that I have the smallest drawer on the top and the biggest drawer on the bottom. And I want to have a logical progression of how those drawers increase in size. And a kind of standard or traditional way of doing that is adding exactly 1 blade width to each drawer as you go down. Now the challenge I have again is that I have to use these double blades, and that'll become more apparent why I had to do that when you see this thing in 3 dimensions. If I were to follow that kind of traditional method, I would actually add a double width to each drawer, but that creates this sort of dramatic increase in drawer width from top to bottom, which I really didn't like. So I decided to just go with the addition of 1 drawer blade thickness to each drawer. So I'll show you how I did that math, but it's probably easiest to view in this view here. I have my base drawer as the top drawer. I then have 2 blades here that I have to add. Then I have the addition of 1 blade in thickness to the second drawer down, plus a double blade. Then I add 2 plus a double blade. Then I add 3. And if you do the math, that's an addition of 12 blade thicknesses on top of the base drawer. So if I go back, I'll show you how I laid that out. So I took the blade thickness, which is 5/8 of an inch, and I just stacked 12 of them up in the bottom of my case. So really no math involved at all here other than counting to 12. I can pretty much handle that. I take that remaining width that's not taken up by drawer blades and I just divide it in 4. And that's what gives me that base drawer width that you see for the top drawer. So then it's just a simple task of adding my double blade in there, and then simply adding a blade width to the next drawer, adding my blades in, so on and so forth. So you end up with that nice progression where each drawer is exactly one blade width wider or taller than the one just above it. So when I remove all of those kind of extra lines, you can see what the final front of the case looks like. And it's a very nice, appealing and logical progression from the top drawer to the bottom drawer. And it's based, on that blade width. And it really didn't require me to do any measurement or math or addition or subtraction other than just accounting for the number of blade widths in my original layout and then figuring out what that base drawer height needs to be. And that's really the key to the process. Now that I've sort of completed the front elevation of the case, if you will, my next step is to build the depth. So I transferred over the height and decided to go with a 12-inch deep piece. It's basically just exactly half the dimension of the height and the width of the piece. I then transfer over the drawer blades from the front. And you might kind of wonder, well, why do you care about the drawer blade thicknesses for the side of the piece? Because you're not actually going to see the drawer blades on the side. You're just going to see a solid side panel. Well, I mentioned that this is going to be a stepped front piece. And this next view will probably start to give you an idea of how I accomplished that. So I took that same thickness that I used to determine the graduation of the drawers in the front, and I'm stepping back each segment of the case, or each sort of drawer box, if I can explain it that way, and I'm basically going to step back each drawer by that 5/8 inch distance. So I just took one of those drawer blades, turned it 90 degrees, and then I just overlaid it across each of my pairs of drawer blades. And that shows you how I basically stepped that front back so that it starts to become narrower and narrower as you go higher and higher in the case. So after I erase all of those extra lines, you can see here exactly why I needed those double drawer blades. If I just had a single drawer blade and I put it up here, I would be left with a gap down on the part below it. And I didn't want the drawers sitting directly on top of one of these blades that extends out a little bit further, because then you'll have the drawer scratching on top of that exposed piece of lumber or material. So that's why I ended up going with the double drawer blades, and hopefully that explains why I needed to design this case the way that I did to get that effect. This will create some complications, but it also adds a lot of visual interest to the piece. Now that I have my dimensions all laid out, I'm left with these two-dimensional pieces, and I could just flip this one around 90 degrees, and what this lets me do is then lay out all of my components for the final three-dimensional model. So this is kind of my story stick, as kind of to use an analogy. And if I go over to the three-dimensional model here, you can see where I used that kind of design methodology and the structure of the two-dimensional pieces as the bones, and then I could kind of get a little bit more creative with how I wanted to handle the joinery and any additional details. So I went with through dovetails to join the casework together. That'll make this a very sturdy piece. And then I'm doing sliding dovetails to hold the blades in place, and there'll be dual dovetails, so that'll also add a lot of support across the case, so it'll be very rigid. And then you can see I added this back on here with a little bit of a slope and a slight curve on the top. And I did that really to balance out sort of the sharp angles and the boxiness of the rest of the piece. So it sort of complemented the rest of this nicely. So I'm pretty happy with how this came out. And now that I'm through the design phase, I can get back down to the shop. I wanted to take the opportunity to point out something that I ran into when I was dimensioning my stock. To begin with, I went with 8/4 lumber, and the reason behind that is that I need those wide 12-inch boards for the top, bottom, and the sides of my case. And to ensure consistency of both color and grain, it can make a lot of sense to basically go with a wider piece, resaw it in half, and then either book match or slip match the two together, and you get a nice even consistency. So when I was resawing that 8/4 stock, what I found was that when I got to the end of the resaw, there was almost a little snapping. There was definitely some pressure involved there. And when I examined the boards, what I found is they were bowed apart like this. So the ends were sort of touching, and there was this big bow in the middle. And essentially what this is a classic case of case hardening. Now what case hardening is when the lumber producer rushes things through the kiln, and without going into too many specifics, what it ends up doing is creating permanent stresses inside the board. So even if you were to acclimate this to your shop for a year, it wouldn't matter. Those stresses are already there. So there's really nothing I could do to prevent this. Fortunately, I'm going all the way down to 5/8 inch dimensions for this. So even though there's going to be a lot of waste in getting these flat and straight again, I started with a wide enough board that that's not going to be a problem. But I did want to point this out because I want to emphasize how important it is to source your lumber from a really high quality distributor if you want to get your best results. I've successfully gotten my stock milled now, and I was able to pull this off despite the fact that I had that bow in a lot of these pieces. So right here are basically my sides, my top, and my bottom. So these are all basically resawn, and I've kept the pairs together just to keep track of them. And I haven't completely decided yet, but I'm either going to book match them or slip match them. Probably going to end up sending them through my planer one time after I finally get them glued up. So it would actually help to have the grain in the same direction. So I may actually choose to slip match, meaning instead of opening up the board like that, I will just slide the board like that, and that keeps the grain direction the same. So that accounts for the case. And then I've made one small change in terms of how I'm going to handle the drawers, and it will require a little bit of a design shift. Well, I played around with a number of different drawer options, and I ended up settling on sort of the traditional approach of just splitting the top two narrowest drawers. I tried a couple different combinations of splitting the top and the second to bottom drawer. I tried, moving the split left and right, and it just looked unbalanced and odd. And I think part of it's just because you see so many pieces of furniture, so many cases that divide either just the top or the top two drawers. So it was just, I don't know, it didn't work for me. So splitting them in half and doing the top two drawers seemed like the best option. So at this point, this is the design that I am going to run with. It's pretty much what I have the stock dimensioned for. So in the next series of steps, I will start doing the joinery.